In 2019, a tree was standing on the wrong side of history. It was not a stray specimen. The forest had simply ignored a line drawn in 1494. Welcome to the science of the unexplained. I want to take you into the space where a line meets something that never agreed to exist. A Brazilian government surveyor in 2019 documented a tree species on the Colombian side of the Amazon border that by every established ecological model should not exist on that side. It was not a stray specimen. It was the dominant canopy species for roughly 40 kilometers, in a direction the models said the climate, the soil and the hydrology all made wrong. The border didn't move, the forest did. You've probably assumed that national borders are invisible to nature, that a line humans drew on paper has no purchase on a river, a root system, a canopy. Here's what the evidence actually shows. At several precise coordinates along the Amazon basin's political boundaries, measurable biological discontinuities appear, discontinuities that track the border more closely than they track any known physical gradient. The border is behaving like a real ecological edge. And it was drawn by men who had never seen the Amazon. In June 1494, Spain and Portugal divided the world. The Treaty of Tordesillas drew a meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, a line cutting straight through a continent neither power had fully mapped, let alone understood. That line, adjusted and contested over centuries, eventually settled into the modern boundaries separating Brazil from its neighbors. It was a political act, a theological one even. It had nothing to do with soil chemistry, watershed gradients, or species distribution. So why do some of those boundaries appear in peer-reviewed botanical surveys to correlate with shifts in forest composition that don't match any known abiotic driver? The Amazon basin covers approximately 5.5 million square kilometers, spanning 9 countries, according to the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. Most ecological transitions within it, changes in tree species density, canopy height, understory composition, track predictable physical variables, rainfall, elevation, river chemistry, soil type. These are measurable, they are mapped. Ecologists at Brazil's National Institute for Amazonian Research, known as INPA, have spent decades building models that predict forest composition from those variables with increasing precision. The models are good, which makes the anomalies harder to dismiss. Botanist William Millikan, during extensive fieldwork cataloguing Amazonian flora for the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, documented distribution patterns in northern Amazonian species that clustered in ways inconsistent with the known physical gradients, clustering that, in several instances, aligned with political rather than geological boundaries. He did not claim the border caused this. He noted carefully that the correlation was there and that the explanation was not. That gap between a documented pattern and the absence of any agreed mechanism is exactly where this story lives. The Brazilian-Colombian border runs for 1,644 kilometers through some of the densest and least accessible forest on the planet. Most of it follows rivers. Rivers make intuitive borders for humans, and they also make real ecological edges. The chemistry of Amazonian rivers differs dramatically, and those chemical differences drive species distributions in ways that are well documented. Black water rivers like the Rio Negro carry dissolved organic matter and low nutrients. White water rivers like the Solimões carry Andean sediment. The fish know the difference, so do the trees along the banks. But the anomalies researchers have noted don't all sit on rivers. Some of them sit on dry land segments of the border, arbitrary lines running through terra firma forest, where no river marks the edge, where the soil on one side looks, by standard assay, like the soil on the other, and yet the species assemblages shift. Ecologist Jose Ferreira Ramos, in fieldwork published through INPA, in the early 2010s, documented what he described as abrupt floristic boundaries in terra firma forest sectors of the northwestern Amazon, boundaries that did not correspond to detectable changes in soil texture, pH, or drainage class. The boundaries were real in the sense that any trained botanist walking through the forest would notice the change. The dominant species in the upper canopy would shift within a span of a few hundred meters. That kind of shift normally requires a physical explanation, a ridge, a drainage divide, a soil transition. In several of the documented cases, none of those features were present at the transition point. What was present in some of those cases was the political border, or a close approximation of it, given the inherent imprecision of GPS mapping in dense canopy. This is where the narrative gets uncomfortable for ecologists trained to distrust anything that sounds like it grants agency to a line on a map. The shift could be artifact, sampling error, the inherent patchiness of tropical forests, the sheer difficulty of standardizing field surveys across two countries with different methodological traditions, or it could be something else, a historical signal perhaps, encoded in the forest over centuries of differential land use, hunting pressure, seed dispersal patterns. But if it's history, whose history? And if the signal has persisted through centuries of forest regeneration, what does that tell us about how long ecological memory actually lasts? The scientific literature on this question is not a clean debate between two well-armed camps. It is something messier, a set of observations that several researchers find compelling, a set of proposed mechanisms that none of them find fully convincing, and a methodological problem that may be for now genuinely unsolvable. The most grounded proposed mechanism is historical land use. Anthropologist Anna Roosevelt, whose excavations at Marajo Island and Monte Alegre in the 1990s fundamentally revised estimates of pre-Columbian Amazonian population density, demonstrated that large, sophisticated societies shaped Amazonian forest composition over millennia. The terra preta, dark, anthropogenically enriched soils found throughout the basin show that indigenous agriculture left lasting marks on the substrate. The argument would run, colonial-era boundaries, imposed over existing indigenous territorial boundaries, froze patterns of land use in place. Different legal regimes produced different extraction pressures on either side of the line. Over centuries, those differential pressures shaped forest composition. The border isn't causing the biological discontinuity. It is, in this reading, a ghost of a much older edge. One that existed before the treaty, one that the treaty accidentally reinforced. This is a serious hypothesis, but it has a problem. It requires that the pre-Columbian territorial boundaries it invokes actually corresponded to the colonial boundaries eventually imposed, a coincidence that would need independent archaeological evidence to support. That evidence, for the specific terra firma sectors where the discontinuities appear, does not currently exist in the literature. A second hypothesis involves differential enforcement of deforestation law. Brazil's legal Amazon framework and Colombia's environmental governance structure diverge significantly, and some researchers at the Monitoring of the Andean Amazon Project, MEP, have used satellite data to show that deforestation pressure is not uniform across the border. If one side experiences higher disturbance, forest composition on that side would skew toward pioneer species and secondary growth assemblages, producing exactly the kind of floristic discontinuity field surveys detect. The problem here is directionality. The documented anomalies predate the satellite era, and the species involved in the early fieldwork accounts were old-growth canopy trees, not secondary growth indicators. Ecologist Carlos Perez at the University of East Anglia, who has published extensively on the edge effects of human intervention in Amazonian forest fragments, has argued that even very low-level, chronic differences in hunting pressure or seed disperser populations can propagate into canopy composition over surprisingly short timescales, decades, not centuries. That mechanism is plausible, It doesn't require ancient history, but it does require that differential human activity on either side of the border be documented and quantified, and for the remote terra firma sectors in question, that quantification hasn't been done. So here is where the science actually stands. There is documented evidence of floristic discontinuities at or near political boundaries in the northwestern Amazon. There are 3 serious candidate mechanisms. None of them has been tested against the specific anomalies with the rigor that would allow a conclusion. The forest is doing something, and the honest answer is that we do not know what is driving it, which means we do not know, at a fundamental level, whether the boundary between Brazil and Colombia is reflecting human history, encoding it, or somehow doing both at once. Here is what we actually know, assembled without flattery. A line drawn for theological and imperial reasons in 1494 sits inside one of the most ecologically complex systems on Earth, and in at least some sectors of that system, the line and the biology are not independent of each other. We know that the mechanisms proposed, historical land use, differential governance, chronic hunting pressure, are all plausible and all unproven for the specific cases that matter. We know that the forest's ecological memory may be longer and stranger than our models currently account for. What this forces us to confront is something quietly destabilizing: the assumption that human political geography and natural geography operate on entirely separate tracks. The evidence doesn't cleanly support that assumption. The border is not magic, but it is also not invisible, not to the trees apparently, and not to the data. The big loop this opened was never really about one border. It was about this. Can a purely human act, a line, a treaty, a decision made in a room by men who had never seen the place they were dividing, leave a physical mark on a living system that outlasts the decision by 5 centuries? The answer, as best we can determine, is possibly yes. And we don't yet know how. If the floristic discontinuities Millikan and Ramos documented are genuinely tracking the political border rather than any physical gradient, what does that tell us about whether human history and natural history can ever really be studied separately? Somewhere else on Earth, a different kind of line was drawn, and the living world on either side of it changed in ways nobody predicted. That story is next.